I think it's time we question this common piece of career advice that you must strike while the iron is hot. Because the smartest move isn't often to just sprint after every single shiny opportunity that comes your way, but to hold your horses. So let's talk about how restraint, not hustling, separates the careers of legendary icons from one-hit wonders, and how it can help you reach excellence sustainably in your career. So the thing is that once you accomplish something great and you have a successful career, you get constantly offers to be part of lots of things, which is all very nice, but it also means that there's that much more decisions to take, to say yes or to say no. So often the more you accomplished, the more you're faced with this question all the time. And the more high profile the opportunity or the collaboration is, the harder it is to turn down because you feel much more pressure. Internal pressure and external pressure, of course. And this concerns all kinds of opportunities, even the ones that you really want to say yes to, not just the bad offers that kind of try to sound good so that you'd say yes. Because you'll wonder if you'll ever get a similar proposition again. What if it's your only shot? You may never know. And you also know that there are so many people out there in the world that would take that offer in a heartbeat if they were in your shoes. So it can seem weird to other people if you turn it down, so that brings you some external pressure on that matter. So these are the questions at the core of having sustainable success, or in other words, career longevity, right? And to illustrate that, I'd like to present you this cultural example of my favorite classical violinist ever, after my mother, of course, who is also a professional violinist. The violinist in question is Anne-Sophie Mutter, who I incidentally actually just saw yesterday. Can you imagine that? She was performing here in Paris at the Maison de la Radio with the Orchestre National de France, which is the National Orchestra of France, I guess. I don't know how they usually translate their name in English, but they play just wonderfully, the whole orchestra. And Mutter was just so inspiring to watch her work. I've actually seen her live once before in 2023 in Turku in Finland, but this was the first time that I saw her really with a full symphony orchestra, and it was just beautiful. I cannot stress enough how wonderful of a night it was. It's so, yeah, this definitely fuels my inspiration to making this video as well, of course. She's just such a great example of having career longevity, so that's why I'm talking about her here, because this year we're celebrating a jubilee of her 50 years on stage. She started when she was 13, now she's 63, and she's still thriving, at least it seems like it. So let's analyze a bit how this career longevity came about. Here's what she said in an interview in 1986 already, when she was just 23 years old, and she was reflecting on her childhood when she was starting out.
How old were you when you entered your first competition?
I was 6. I just played 6 months, and after that I won the biggest German prize, a special prize they never give before and never after. And I went to this competition because my parents didn't believe, that I played not bad. And so my teacher thought maybe it's a good idea to show them. And I went there and I won the prize. And after that, a lot of people tried to push me in a Wunderkind career, a prodigy child.
Yes.
But my father, of course, stopped everything, and I played only 2 or 3 concerts together with my brother until the age of 10.
But I mean, what did your parents decide at that?
Just not playing in public, not playing more than 2 or 3 very small and nice, more or less family concerts a year, just to get used to the atmosphere. People are coughing there,
So the temptation would have been for them to have made money, and therefore you would have been exploited, but that didn't happen.
More or less, yes.
In fact,
or just to show which nice daughter they have.
Yes, right. How important is the relationship that you've had these many years now with Herbert von Karajan?
Of course, he is the musician with the most importance in my life. Because after this concert in Salzburg, everything was open for me. Everybody was coming to me, and I just had to say no, not more than 7 concerts. Of course, my father said that, and my teacher, not more than 7 or 8 concerts, and I slowly developed my repertoire. But to have played with Karajan is, just like a mark. I mean, everybody knows that you have a certain level.
I just love that. Mutter's parents' and teachers' reaction was just exemplary, right? Because when she was only 6 years old, they allowed her to perform only in small circles first. And then even at 13, when she was 13 years old, and the conductor Herbert von Karajan discovered her, and she played in this big concert with him, Still, after that, after all getting all these offers to work, to go, have this child prodigy career, they allowed her to play only 7 or 8 concerts per year. So it was very limited. In other words, they held their horses. They realized this quite intuitively, apparently, that it's not only beneficial for Mutter's growth as a person, but also a great move in terms of career and business strategy. Now, as a parallel to this whole cultural example, I'd like to stretch out to this idea that we find in the laws of marketing. I recently read this book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, which was just brilliant. I loved every word of it, basically. And the 21st law is called the law of acceleration, that applies to this career longevity question perfectly. Now, this is a bit of a long quote from the book, but I feel like it provides so much great nuance that I'd like to read it all the way through, and it's very engaging. A fad is a wave in the ocean, and a trend is the tide. A fad gets a lot of hype, and a trend gets very little. Like a wave, a fad is very visible, but it goes up and down in a big hurry. Like the tide, a trend is almost invisible, but it's very powerful over the long term. A fad is a short-term phenomenon that might be profitable, but a fad doesn't last long enough to do a company much good. Furthermore, a company often tends to gear up as if a fad were a trend. When the fad disappears, a company often goes into a deep financial shock. Here's the paradox. If you were faced with a rapidly rising business with all the characteristics of a fad, the best thing you could do would be to dampen the fad. By dampening the fad, you stretch the fad out, and it becomes more like a trend. The most successful entertainers are the ones who control their appearances. They don't overextend themselves, they're not all over the place, they don't wear out their welcome. Elvis Presley's manager, Colonel Parker, made a deliberate attempt to restrict the number of appearances and records the king made. As a result, every time Elvis appeared, it was an event of enormous impact. Forget fads, and when they appear, try to dampen them. One way to maintain a long-term demand for your product is to never totally satisfy the demand. But the best, most profitable thing to ride in marketing is a long-term trend. This is intriguing. So, the way I see it, Mutter's debut with Carry On was a fad. A fad of success that, here's a new child prodigy. But her parents and her teacher dampened the fad. They didn't totally satisfy the geeky classical music audience that was just thrilled to have this new prodigy in the house. They realized that even though their daughter is very talented, it's no reason to not to have a relatively normal childhood. They realized that it's not the end of the world if they don't capitalize on this success right away. And it was actually kind of good that Mutter's parents weren't apparently these great music buffs, because they were probably less tempted to climb the ladder of that world that can be quite addicting too. What's interesting that I actually watched this new interview this week of the actress Reese Witherspoon, and she said something very similar here.
Because I got calls after the first movie I did. I got offers to be on broadcast television shows, and I turned them down. And I'm really glad my parents held the line with that, because all those things I learned about being a kid were just formed by growing up in Nashville and going to prom and feeling awkward in the school cafeteria.
So now we can see that both Witherspoon's and Mutter's careers turned out to be these great trends because they dampened the fad first when they started out. For example, in Mutter's case, also in Witherspoon's actually, the public waited for them to grow up, basically, because they were still so young. And at least now in Mutter's case, we can see that it was a good choice because she's still at the peak of her career at 63, or maybe, I don't know if actually she's already turned 63, but yeah, 62, 63 years old now. She must have done many things right to make it happen, of course. It's not just this one thing at the start of her career, but at least she must be very grateful to her parents that they, first of all, let her go all in on her passion. She still could play the violin, but they didn't let her become too famous too early. So we just saw that fads are these flashy, visible things, but short-lived, And trends are more invisible but most powerful and compounding nature over time. So managing these fads and trends comes to this art of selectivity, choosing the right opportunities, like we said in the beginning. This makes me think of this famous quote by this investor Naval Ravikant. He says that the classical virtues are all decision-making heuristics to make one optimize for the long term rather than for the short term. And that's so true. I'm such an idealist that I just love to think about these virtues and these big ideals that we have. For example, I really love the word elegance, which comes from the verb eligere from Latin, that means to choose or to select. It conveys that idea. And if we get good at making these career and life moves that are often very counterintuitive, it can lead to lots of clarity in our life and, most importantly, career longevity, like in Mutter's or Witherspoon's case. So the goal is to deliberately do less in order to extend the trend of your career. Which means that you don't chase every single collaboration that may come your way. You don't have to be on all the platforms all at once. You don't have to pursue every single product idea you ever have. This is like such a hard area of life where you have to stand firm in your decision. But the good thing about this is that often when you're faced with that choice, you know in your gut feeling which one is the right choice. That's where our unconscious minds and everything helps us, actually. And most likely you will have to say no a lot more than you say yes. And it takes a lot more guts to say no more as well, as you know. But we can get much more clarity on or saying no more easily if you know what you're already saying yes to. So it's easier to leave money on the table, for example, or the opportunities on the table if you know what you already cherish in your life that's off the table. Just a weird way of saying that if you already value the peace and calm you have in your life, or that you have time for your family, time for the actual life stuff that really matters, to spend time with your close ones, for example, if you have enough of that time, you can say no much easier to new opportunities that you know would steal from that time, as a basic example. But considering that you've now selected a project that you're working on, you've selected it with care. The next problem is probably that you can start tweaking and optimizing the life out of it. Does that sound familiar? Could be possible. So in this next video, I'm pretty sure you'd like it, I talk about the comforting concepts that help me take a much more relaxed approach to this productivity thing. So I'll see you there. Bisous.